Okay, so good afternoon, guys. I think we have some people on YouTube. We have quite a few people here. So first of all, thank you very much for joining us. This is the first of many panels that we hope to be doing over the next year. So I hope that you guys could join us every 6 weeks approximately. Reach out to Olya either after this or tomorrow to make sure you're on the invite list. And we're hoping to see the same faces and even more as time continues. Wanted to start with an interesting fact before I these guys with an interesting fact that I came across this morning. It basically says the phrase supply chain was coined in 1982, the same year the computer won Times Man of the Year. So it's actually really interesting because today we're here to talk about the evolving face of technology in the supply chain. And it's ironic that the coining of the term supply chain was actually started when the computer was the time of the year, like Times Magazine Man of the Year. Anyway, my point is that the technology that we have today is really what's enabling companies like Amazon to be as efficient as they are in delivering products and getting products to you when you need them and when you want them. My wife actually ordered a product this morning at about 9 o'clock, and it was at our doorsteps by 12. And it was not Amazon Prime now, it was regular Amazon, so we were a little shocked. But that's what supply chain does. Anyway, I'm joined here by fantastic group of people, and we only have one microphone today, so bear with us as we continue to improve and actually establish ourselves in our office. You'll see a little more improvement in our technology. I also don't have an iPad, so I was told it was distracting last time. So we're really here to talk about three aspects of technology. The first one is the visual aspect, right? And I'm joined by Dan and Edwin, who are industry experts in both mobile technology and augmented reality. We're here to talk about the processing aspect of the supply chain. Joined here by Paul, and that's really machine learning and artificial intelligence. And then the final thing is really the back end, the blockchain, the piece that holds it all together. So if I could give you three takeaways for today, the first one is communication between machines is likely to be the final phase in communications for the supply chain. The second is we are collecting oceans of data, and it needs to be converted into actionable data. And the third one is actually a quote by IBM's vice president for blockchain. And he actually stated that supply chain is the most likely application for blockchain after financial services. So for those of you in financial services, if you're not taking advantage or understanding or exploring the blockchain already, I think it's time for you guys to start. That being said, I wanted to start with one more quote. And it's a quote that I found from back in 2010. It said something like this, right? It's everyone is going mobile. As consumers, we're snapping up smartphones, downloading apps, uploading photos, texting and tweeting. Thanks to mobility, we're never more than a Wi-Fi or hotspot or cell tower away from the information that's most important to us. I think if you added Instagram, that quote could have been yesterday. But that was said by a supply chain VP back in 2010 or 2011. And it should come as no surprise that that hype is still around 6 years later, 7 years later. So Edwin, I'm going to start with you. Why do you think that today, more than ever, mobile is really paving the way for all these other technologies that I just mentioned to transform the supply chain?
Well, Edwin Huertas, I'm the CEO of Shockoe. So back in 2010, that, like you said, it's kind of interesting. They said that back in 2010. Right now, if you think about how mobile is creating all of this hype for the supply chain, I think it's because of the data. And the easy way of working in any industry with mobile devices, and at the end of the day, it creates more data, which it's gonna make some matter to you with machine learning. It's gonna be blockchain to make sure the protocols, the information is correct. And at the end of the day, in the virtual reality stuff and augmented reality. So how do we, and that will help the companies to, be not in the actual location, but anywhere to actually see what's going on with the process, which is supply chain. There's a bunch of processes that happen in a certain way. So everybody will be touched in the supply chain in that way. With mobile, it's gonna continue being the main, either main way of connecting or creating more data, main way interacting with these devices, main way of actually having a screen next to you will be the easiest way to continue working on, whatever it is that industry is doing at that point. I don't know if that makes sense. What about you?
So, yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to get better at this microphone thing, guys. So Paul, I guess just going on to you. AI is definitely the flavor of the month, flavor of the year, and flavor of next year. So, for those of you in the ice cream business, mute it. And I'll keep reiterating.
Has been a discipline for a long time and actually has been a part of supply chain for some time. So later on, we'll talk about how kind of some of the new machine learning and data engineering has changed the way that data science is applied to supply chain. But it definitely has a history in forecasting in the supply chain, and there's some pretty interesting things that I think converge with a number of technologies that we're going to be talking about today that I think will bring machine learning and data science essentially to ahead in novel ways.
So what's all the buzz with AI? What are some of the key players in the industry doing, and where do you think they're going to be taking this?
So from there's a lot of activity with the largest technology companies in the world who are innovating really cutting edge platforms. So the Googles and Microsofts and Apples of the world are building frameworks, and there's a lot of thought leadership and research going on in the space. In supply chain specifically, I think if you look at what SAP is doing, for example, they seem to be very early on, but they're essentially implementing machine learning at two levels. They're doing kind of at the technology level, like embedding machine learning and data science capabilities in HANA, which is their kind of in their database platform. And then they've got something called Leonardo, which is really early. It's similar to, if you look at Salesforce.com, they've created something called Einstein, which is essentially machine learning that's embedded into their products. So it's like software as a service for machine learning. So I think what you're going to see from vendors are kind of those two things. You're going to see vendors that are looking to commoditize very well-known machine learning patterns and embed them into their products. And then you're going to see the tool sets like R and Python and all the frameworks like TensorFlow that will be embedded in the technical level so that you can do very specific, like bespoke implementations of machine learning.
Awesome, thank you. And so just continuing down the list. So Will, I guess don't really need an introduction, but I'm interested to know who here has heard of blockchain. Bitcoin? Bitcoin? Anybody? Bitcoin? Going once? Going twice? Bitcoin? So why don't you tell us? I'd love to hear some like what are the differences between blockchain and Bitcoin? Because a lot of people really like put those hand in hand. And why are we talking about this? So the VP of blockchain for IBM said this is the most important industry. The supply chain is the most impacted industry outside of the financial service industry. Why do you think that's the case?
Hello, yeah, I'm Will Middleton, Cloud Data Systems. We're kind of focusing on blockchain applications here in the city of Richmond. For the first question, like what the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain is, I'm sure you all have heard of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin basically is an application that sits on the fundamental technology, which is the blockchain, right? The blockchain is kind of a distributed ledger that allows people to basically keep track of these any transactions that you have, right? The transactions can be an exchange of some value like money, or it can be even just the exchange of some good that you're keeping track of. It's just a medium of exchange. And you know, you definitely don't want to get the two confused. You don't want to see like, okay, hey, maybe there's nefarious activity that's Bitcoin, right? And equate the two with blockchain and Bitcoin, right? Don't want to do that. So there will be a lot of interesting applications coming in the future on blockchain. And then for the second question on where blockchain technology fits into the supply chain, so I think where this is going is, you know, we are going to have, with IoT and machine learning, we are going to have machines making decisions and transacting with each other here in the, you know, in the very, very near future. And so they need some way to keep track of these transactions, right? And so if they're able to broadcast any sort of exchange that occurs and post it to this global kind of public ledger that anyone can go and verify, you create this system where you really don't need a whole lot of humans in there checking to make sure that, you know, this was a valid exchange, or that, you know, this machine or this container, you know, had the rights to the good that it, you know, then sent to another party. And so the blockchain technology really allows us to kind of verify that all these transactions are valid and really keep track of kind of who owns what when on the supply chain. It's many other applications as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great introduction, and I know we have several questions after this, but I think this is the question I'm actually most interested in asking. Dan, if you have not had the opportunity to hear Dan speak at a solo presentation, I strongly encourage it. He presents quite often, and he's great at it. But he's also great at one more thing, and that's really chasing creatures across Richmond. Creatures on a screen, on a fake screen, that are basically brought to life by the iPhone or any Android device. I'm really referring to Pokemon, right? So Nintendo did this fantastic job at gamifying this game, right? And bringing it to life and bringing AR to life. So my question to you is, Pikachu isn't real, but I'm assuming that he will be able to help us with the supply chain. And I just want to know how you think that'll happen.
Thanks, Alex. So, as Alex mentioned, about a year ago, Pokemon Go came on the scene, right? Niantic made this thing that everyone under the sun suddenly said, well, AR is the next big thing. And what I find most interesting about that is that, to me, Pokemon Go isn't even AR in the sense that they were trying to promote it as. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about how they promote the AR, they say, well, you find this thing, this little monster, you pull it up, and suddenly you see it in its environment. Well, it's not quite true. You see a 2D representation of it. It's not really interacting with the environment, and it's not really superimposing or adding anything to the environment. It's novel, but most people, I believe, if you look at the UX at the beginning, turned that feature off. What I do find fascinating about that app, though, and what I do think is true to how it augmented the experience, the keyword being augment, is if you think about how they took that geographic data of that mapping system and superimposed it with a user interface that people found intuitive and exciting and engaging. So that gets us to, if we start with mobile and we start with the power of that mobility, of having that thing in your hand the whole time, and we get into what all of these gentlemen have talked about with how you access the data, how that data can make for efficiencies along the supply chain, we have to ask, what does that future look like? And to me, it looks like, as silly as this sounds, Pokemon Go. Because Pokemon Go is taking and augmenting something new and novel and efficient over that data. So if we think about augmented reality and three-dimensional interfaces, virtual reality, et cetera, what can you do when you suddenly have a third dimension? What can you do when you have spatial considerations, when you have proximity, when you have scale, when you have lighting changing in real time? What does that mean for data, right? How can we mark data in a warehouse and see it from anywhere in that warehouse? How can we see it moving? How can we see it changing? How can work orders suddenly become, if we take it away from a handset and put it into a headset, and you can see through that headset and you can see your work order and it's all hands-free? What do hands-free work instructions look like? What does that mean for efficiency and speed? And what does that mean for training, right? There's a lot there. And so for me, when we get to the AR and VR component, this is kind of that next step, right? If we can innovate with mobile, we can build and refine this data to increase these efficiencies, how do we then apply that to be the most intuitive, innovative interface possible?
So all kidding aside, I'm not quite sure how much you love Pokemon, but what I'm hearing you say is really that game really brought AR to the masses, and it's very interesting to see how a simple game really made us all aware of how important AR can be, not only for games but for the supply chain. So in this next section, I really encourage all of you guys to participate in the questions. I'm going to have questions for each and every one of you. But as you see the need, please feel free to interject as it relates to the topic and informs the people out here. So Edwin, going back, so we've talked about a lot of positive stuff, but I want to bring it down to reality, right? So the article I mentioned is about 6 or 7 years old, and various companies and industries still fall short in mobile, right? We consult a lot of them. You consult a lot of them. We're on the phone with several of them. Why do you think this happens, specifically in the supply chain? And what are some key examples of people doing it right?
So I guess the issues that I'm seeing right now, most of the issues that people or companies come to us is because some of them don't have the knowledge of what that means in mobility. How do I apply mobility in my company? How do I apply mobility in this type particular set of my company or this line of business? So in the supply chain, what I'm seeing is most of the time is the data. How do we make that data available for the employees so they can do it right, or they know what to do next, or what to use, or how to proceed, and so don't have to go through these channels of or approvals or any of that red tape that creates by having data not available at the right time at the right moment. So I think mobility is making that change a little bit slower on the big companies because of the data. We had a few companies as examples on the distribution side that came to us with this really old hardware that wanted to have a better ways of improving the process of the distribution. So how do I get picking and storing, getting the products right fast, so without any errors by selecting the wrong product. So with mobility, what we were able to help was to create an application that connected to all of these systems and bring it into one place, so we can easily get the data that we needed as fast as we could to present it to the user in a really simple way, so they knew what to pick next or what to store, where to get it the next time. So it's in the distribution side we've been seeing a lot more success, but there's so many other in the logistics side and transportation. We have other companies in transportation as well that the drivers now have in their hands things that they can use and deliver things, and they get signed. So imagine all of that before they had to sign papers and then go back to the office, go through that system and enter that manually. So it's evolving, it's getting there. I still think there's at least 5 more years that we can see mobility being big portion of improving the productivity of any portion of the supply chain.
Any thoughts, guys?
Well, I think just because I think we're talking, thank you. I think we're a lot of what you're talking about there, Edwin, is so much of that it comes down to the user interface and the front side of things, right? So we're developing this software with these specific tasks in mind, right? I think the supply chain is a very task-driven industry, and so I think everything you mentioned is so spot on, because with tasks come results, come expectations, and of course all of that lives on the data. But I think it's interesting because if you think about how these both mobile interfaces and augmented reality interfaces, or even web interfaces, at the end of the day, it really does come down to, can we communicate those tasks and those goals and those results in a way that leads to the end goal of efficiencies. And how does it tie back into that data? So I think it's just really fascinating to think about how, 50, 70, even 100 years ago, what did a tool mean for a worker then versus what does a tool mean now? At the end of the day, kind of means the same thing, right? It's a tool that they use to get the job done. It's just we're so much more sophisticated now, and that's why it requires, a chart like this to explain how this technology comes together. And I think that's what we mean by evolving that face of technology in the supply chain.
So you guys pointed on three different very, very interesting topics. The first one is we're replacing paper, right? As I hold paper in my hand, it's so much easier to get data onto a screen or onto something visual without having to print it and then have it outdated. The second thing you mentioned is really what you said. It's a tool, right? It's a tool that processes data. And alone, mobile has been able to display or process data or show data a little more efficiently than the regular computer screen, and a little more real time, in more real time. And that's where I think machine learning is really fantastic. And I think that's why you're here, Paul, right? So machine learning in the supply chain, as you mentioned, isn't new, right? Data processing in the supply chain isn't new. But it is the flavor of the month. I think every single client that we talk about, or two, is interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Why do you think that is, or what's the insight behind that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep hitting on this data thing. So I think there's a convergence of a lot of trends that make machine learning really important and useful now. Of course, we've got compute and the cloud. We've got a proliferation of data. We've got a maturing of the tools and frameworks that you can use on top of it. Supply chain is a large-scale distributed problem. And I think what you're seeing is more and more, there's more data available to analyze and make decisions about. So it's about how it's applied and how it's going to be applied. A lot of data still today is locked up in ERP systems or in disparate places. So I think what you're going to see over time, and the companies that are really leveraging machine learning effectively, they're doing it at the enterprise level. Underpinning all of that is the availability of data at an atomic level in real time. Making like that's, if we're looking like at a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's got to come first to really apply machine learning techniques at scale across a distributed problem like this.
So in terms of the data, so I mentioned before the problems that we usually have is data. How do we get the data? Now we're seeing some of the more advanced clients are, all right, now that I have the data, what do I do with this to improve the actual outcome? So we have orders that are coming from company X, but now we need to understand, do we need to pick those first? Can we apply the questions that, can we apply some of the machine learning so we know what to pick next before the client tells what to do next? Because we have all this data based on historical data that will tell us, okay, now they're ordering, 20 boxes of this. I'm pretty sure by Tuesday we'll need another 20 boxes. So beforehand, we're gonna start picking those before. So that's the next step that I see in machine learning. With mobile, I guess, ideally would be presenting that information faster, so it also deliver the results faster too.
When you kind of talk about the data is really what drives all these applications, and in the blockchain space, I think it allows people to store these transactions, this data on a public blockchain, and then for third parties or other parties that they want to maybe share this data with, they can kind of give them a private key, right? It's almost like an API key, right? And then they are able to go out there and maybe see some of the sometimes encrypted data that you would actually store on the blockchain. So it's not like companies have to go out there and publish all their data in public for everyone to see. You can encrypt this stuff and then store it on a blockchain, and makes it very, very easy for the right, the correct parties to be able to kind of view that information and analyze it.
And I think the key, and I think this is where Edwin touched on this, and again, as it relates to user interface, but it really underpins everything here, is even if we process that data quickly, it's still only as efficient as that end user interface. So, thinking 10 years ago, we could, even if we had machine learning and blockchain that was very efficient 10 years ago, if you then had to print it out, take that printout, hand it to someone, have them give that order to someone else, have that give that order to someone else, the efficiency is lost. But because of how all this works together, so AR is a really good example. Think about that hands-free headset. Someone has their mobile device in their pocket. Let's say they're a warehouse foreman, and they get a new work order in that happens almost instantaneously because of the fact that you have this machine learning and blockchain technology dictating how fast it's processed. And then they can push it out to a worker on the floor where they say, hey, you actually need to grab, let's say it's logistics, you need to grab this box off of that truck before that truck leaves in 10 minutes. Well, they can have this headset on. All of a sudden, because all of this is working together, that box is superimposed with a three-dimensional color. Just, it could be red, right? And they're going to see that box from across the warehouse. They can walk over to that truck, pick that box up, take it off the truck, and you don't have to worry about all the inefficiencies of shipping the wrong product to the wrong place, dealing with those returns, right? So all of it, it's got to be all connected, because it doesn't matter if you lose, and conversely, it doesn't matter if you have these great interfaces if you don't have the data processing underneath. So it's really cool to see how it all works together.
So you guys keep on mentioning one of the most interesting aspects of this whole conversation, and that's data, right? Data here, data there, data everywhere. And with data, we all know the biggest risk that we have is really security. And that's where you come in, right? And blockchain's interesting, right? The blockchain's one of these things like the cloud, right? It's just up there somewhere, processing stuff. So from my perspective, I know it's one of the least mature technologies out there, at least outside of blockchain, outside of Bitcoin. But there's several elements in the supply chain that it could be helpful. One of them is procurement. With procurement, we have a lot of data, a lot of financial pieces associated to it, and obviously a lot of risk. So can you tell us how the blockchain would be applied to procurement or the supply chain in general?
Yeah, so I think blockchain will it really allows a company to kind of, I mean, there's a lot of risk inherent in any supply chain, right? So like you're tracking all these goods all over the world. You have to make sure that, maybe you take, I don't know, there's this good example here recently of like avocados being shipped around the world. And I think Walmart is working with IBM right now to integrate kind of the Ethereum blockchain, smart contract kind of blockchain technology. And for a process where they needed to see where these avocados had been for the past, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, like where they came from, what kind of weather conditions they had been under. This process took them a really, really long time, like weeks of kind of like digging through paperwork and all that stuff. Now kind of interfacing with the blockchain, they are able to query that information in a matter of seconds, right? So it really helps. I think once you start storing all this information on the blockchain and being able to access it in real time, I think it really starts to kind of transform the risk profile of certain goods moving around the world. In addition, I mean, I guess we can get into this a little bit later, but when it comes to like maybe even financing, people trying to buy goods, right? Financing like receivables for a company. You have banks that are able to see, okay, well, is this shipment going to be delayed by some storm or something like that, right? And all that information can be stored on the blockchain technology, and it makes that whole decisioning process a lot easier, a lot more fluid, a lot more efficient.
That's interesting. And so I guess just one more question, and you might have covered this a little bit, but we talk about the blockchain. My understanding is there's multiple types of blockchains. Can you give us a little more insight into that?
So there are multiple different blockchain applications. I think two that you'll hear about here in the news a lot is Ethereum and Bitcoin. they are just applications that are on top of a blockchain. However, in Ethereum basically implements these smart contracts where it is a piece of code that will sit on their blockchain. It will run on their kind of virtual machine, which is a cloud computer, basically, right? That kind of interfaces with their entire network. Bitcoin is, purely the exchange of value. But there's kind of, it's good to think about this technology in two different ways. One is the public blockchain, which is those two products sit on their own public blockchain. And then there's private blockchains, which, I think Oracle, Azure, AWS, like EC2, you can spin up these kind of private blockchain consortiums. So it's like you spin up your own bunch of computers. They act as one network. And then those can track your specific goods in private, not having to interface with this kind of broad public blockchain that's kind of open access to anyone, right, in the public. So there are tons of different applications right now. There are more coming out every day. I think right now, in terms of companies launching their own blockchains, public blockchains, I think it's like upwards of 2,000, right? Different applications that are sitting on their own blockchains. Everyone's kind of looking at this space to try to disrupt these kind of current industries. And so there's a lot of different use cases, and they're kind of changing every day.
That's incredible. So before I continue, I just wanted to ask the people on YouTube to type your questions into the chat, and Olya will be recording them. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions yet, but if there are, we'll take them at the end of this presentation. So continuing just a little more. So I'm going to bring you back from the back end and all the way up to the user interface. Dan, I know you lead the immersive media practice here, and it's easy for us to talk about augmented reality because it's the closest to commercial purposes. But there's several different aspects of immersiveness, right? So there's IoT, and when done right, IoT can really be disruptive in the supply chain. I also think that AR and VR can be confused and go hand in hand, but there's different applications for them. Where do you think businesses should position themselves to really extend AR into the business and really integrate that capability with IoT devices?
Thanks, Alex. So actually, I should probably start there. I realize I think I jump into things pretty quickly with AR and VR because I'm so comfortable with it, but it's that curse of knowledge thing, right? I should clarify what we mean by immersive tech. What we see AR and VR as, and why they're similar and why they're also different. And then I'll get into the question of how that relates to IoT. So for starters, immersive media, specifically AR and VR, has to do with these new innovative interfaces, both combined hardware and software connection, that can interact with a space using 3 dimensions. So if we think about why that's important, we've grown up using 3 dimensions, right? You're born into a 3-dimensional world. It's not until someone hands you a piece of paper and a pen that you start working and thinking in 2 dimensions. So there's an intuitiveness to thinking in 3 dimensions. So what's the difference between VR and AR? Well, virtual reality often uses some form of headset. It can be 360 video, it can be 3D interactive simulations, but ultimately the isolation of that headset places someone into a space, right? They go into that new 3-dimensional space. Augmented reality, on the other hand, uses some sort of device, either a handset or a headset, to augment an existing space, right? To superimpose data in 3 dimensions into that 3-dimensional space. So getting back to AR, thinking about AR, if it's a handset, if I were to hold my phone out and decide to place something in an environment, let's say I'm an interior designer and I want to see what a couch is going to look like next to that wall. I can hold up my phone, or if I have glasses, there are headsets that we can use. I can see exactly what the couch is going to look like, but I'm not just going to see what I think it's going to look like. I can walk around, I can see how far out it's going to be, I can see what it's going to look like when we change the lighting, I can see what it's going to look like if we change the paint in the room, right? So there's a lot of power to being able to manipulate data in 3 dimensions. And specifically, it's that idea of augmenting, right? So you're taking what's already there and you are improving upon it. So How does that get to IoT? Well, IoT means that we can place things into the environment that allow us to interact with said environment. So if you think about it's something as simple as a shipping label. Right now, we print out the label on a crate every time we want to change it, right? Think about how inefficient that is. Think about how much waste that generates. What if we only had to print out or create a single carton, right? A single shipping container. And depending on how we are interfacing from an augmented perspective, we can see whatever we want to see. The data can change and instantaneously update. So someone's holding up their phone and they're seeing what's in that crate. Next week, something different is in the crate. It's the same crate, it's different data. We don't have to print out and ship. Think about what it takes to place that there. So thinking about how IoT comes into that, we can use beacons. We can use advanced connected technology, things like Raspberry Pi, things like Arduino, microcontrollers that can send and receive data in a way that interfaces with an augmented interface, so that everybody is seeing all of this in real time, dynamically, moving throughout a warehouse, because obviously supply chain is very fast, very rapid. And therefore we're generating efficiencies using all of this connected tech. It's some pretty exciting stuff. If you really think about what that means, it's what I like to geek out about.
Adding to it, so augmented reality, like you mentioned, differences between virtual reality and augmented reality. In terms of mobile devices, you need to have a screen. For augmented reality, you have to have a screen, either headset or handset. Most of the time, because of the popularity of iOS 11, the new iPhone 8, and the new iPhone X, you're gonna see more and more people using their devices to actually have this type of technology in their hands, which is gonna have a lot more use cases for companies, for businesses. So last week we were at this event, and a guy from a CEO from this company said, "So what do I do with AR right now? What the business cases are for AR in this case?" So I was trying to explain to him, one of the things that with machine learning, understanding how the data is going to flow from one place to another place, superimposing that flow of the data, just pointing your iPad or your phone to see what product comes from into the warehouse and how that goes out of the warehouse. You can see, superimpose the data. 20 boxes came in here, 20 got in the store, 3 got damaged, and so on, without you even walking to it. But you can tell exactly what happened just by superimposing the warehouse. So businesses are now looking for, how do I use virtual reality in my business? How do I use augmented reality in the business? And I just can see more and more coming out, these ideas of superimposing data, getting real data really like up to the date, with basically saying, yeah, you have this many things in this particular section of the warehouse, up to the point that you sold as many things, on this to this client.
That's a great point, Edwin. And I think one thing that really made me think of is how these technologies, we can use this augmented tech. Obviously, I mentioned that idea of hands-free, right? You have these headsets that allow you to see hands-free work instructions. But we'd be remiss, we keep talking about, I think, product in supply chain, but supply chain is so much greater than that. Because think about, let's take logistics. The trucks, think about how integral the trucks are in logistics. Well, what does it take to service a truck? Well, when you look at that truck, let's say you open the engine, you've got, and this is where I get back to that idea of we were born into and we live in a three-dimensional world. You don't just look at an engine, press things on a flat plane and fix it, right? You have to get in there. You have to come from beneath. You have to come from the side. You have to pull things out. So imagine having a hands-free headset and suddenly you're seeing three-dimensional renderings of the work instructions for how to replace or change things in this truck. Think about how much faster that truck gets on the road. Think about how much faster it is to train people to get those trucks back on the road. Things like that, where we can use this technology to really touch every point in this supply chain, all the way up to the retail where it gets into the consumer's hand. The consumer can be determining which product they want to buy. So it really does span the entirety of everything along the supply chain.
So we only have a few more minutes, so I want to ask one more question and then kind of wrap it up, or actually open it up to questions in the audience. I think what I've heard a lot of you say is, and maybe it's just myself, but mobile is still paving the way for a lot of the new technologies to enter into the supply chain. But something that keeps on standing out is machine learning, right? Machine learning is definitely the glue that holds it all together. And I wanted to really open this up to all of you. Why do you think it's so important that companies invest not only in mobile, not only in AR, not only in exploring blockchain, but really truly invest into understanding what artificial intelligence is beyond the Times Magazine type of reading, and what machine learning is?
You want to start?
Good. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think in the end, it's really about getting predictive and even prescriptive with your data. So instead of just kind of presenting it to people, you can actually start to have machines making decisions. And again, when you converge all of these different technologies together, you can start to do things that I think we just wouldn't imagine today. So the fluidity of things, optimizing, integrating systems together, having them make decisions about, purchases, what's the most optimal way to ship something and supply something. I just think that ultimately it's the future, because we have so many. We're not going to take humans out of the loop, right? But in everything, but there are certainly things that machines can make more effective decisions on. And I think ultimately it's going to be the key to driving efficiency in the supply chain.
So, and machine learning, I think it's really easy when you've been doing a certain job for 20 years and you build up your expertise in that area and you're doing constant analysis every single day, to kind of fall into I guess the trap of seeing things all kind of in one dimension, right? The same way, like, oh, well, this problem is wrong, or this problem is happening. I'm going to go here and search, for this solution, right? But machine learning really allows us to incorporate data from all different facets of the business, and really be able to start to see solutions that maybe even humans would not really typically look for, right? It might be even easier than the way you've kind of always done it in the past. And so I really think I mean that's to me, that's really why machine learning is really exciting. Is it's giving us the ability to find really new solutions to ongoing problems in a very unique and kind of fascinating way.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. So you're talking about 3 dimensions. Machine learning has the ability to look at data in hundreds and thousands of dimensions. So it has the ability to identify patterns when applied correctly in data that it's difficult for a human to work in, that multidimensional space. Don't want to oversell it though. There are, it's limited in many ways. The human brain is the most advanced, learning model out there. So I think we're awesome at a lot of things, and what machine learning currently does is help us in areas that we have difficulty.
I think, and this is where my UX designer side is going to show a little bit. I think, and I think you hit on this a little bit, where it is one of the things that we are prone to. The beauty and wonder of humans can also be one of our issues in assessing things, is that we have inherent biases, right? We come with our own history, or we come with an organizational history, or we come with what we think is the thing, right? Well, sometimes what we think is the thing isn't the thing. And machines, as flawed as they are, they're not going to intentionally, at least not yet, they're not going to intentionally lie, right? They're not going to intentionally deceive us. If it is a deception, it's because someone probably entered the information wrong. And so why is that so powerful? If you think about why organizational efficiencies lack that efficiency, it often is a result of human error and bias. This is a way for us to be predictive. This is a way for us to get past that. And that's, to me, that's what I find really exciting about it, just from an operations standpoint, but also thinking about it from kind of a psychological and strategic standpoint.
So before we close, I know it's 6:20. I wanted to open it up to see if anybody in YouTube first had any questions. Oh yeah. No. Anybody in the audience? Yeah. And I'll repeat the question, by the way.
Yeah, so I'm not an SAP expert, and I'll try carefully. So I think the challenge with SAP is getting the data out. Obviously, there is a lot of data. It's not necessarily, you have to kind of prepare data. You have to feature, put it into features so that you can apply machine learning models, like do the training on the data. So inherently, I don't think there's a benefit. I think based on the strategy that I think they're going after, I guess that's similar to Salesforce, they're going to embed machine learning functionality into the ERP itself, which should give them an advantage because they have an install base that they can leverage. I think it's yet to be seen like how successful that is. I think the reason why I keep on bringing up Salesforce is they've gone pretty far. They made a key acquisition, and they're actually deploying separate machine learning models in a number of core areas for individual customers. So again, I think it's going to be a combination of, yes, there are things embedded in it, and it's going to work great. And then you can build your own custom solutions. But I think in the ecosystem, like there's companies like JDA, for example. There's a lot of companies in the ecosystem that I think make their living around SAP, and they may be more successful in rolling that functionality out. So hopefully I answered your question.
You had a question as well? Yeah. That's a great question. You want to start?
Sure. So I think I gave you a couple examples, right? So in the transportation industry, the idea of superimposing some of that data when they are actually not driving, but there's some information they can see. The managers being able to tell what happens in a specific line of in the warehouse. Who is where doing what, who is picking what. That's on real time right now. This is what we're working on, and there's also the wearables, the IoT sensors that we're installing in different areas of these companies to actually obtain some data in order to present it back to the users. So that's happening right now in terms of mobility. I don't know if you guys have any.
So in terms of the immersive space, one of the things about this is the first commercially available virtual reality headsets came out last April, give or take. So we're only looking at about 16 months, give or take. And then with AR, the handset stuff is even more recent. AR Core, I think, came out about a month ago. AR Kit came out a couple of months ago. So in terms of what we're doing with clients, a lot of our first effort for that ends up being strategic. How can we look to start implementing these things, be it in a small way or a large way, organizationally? Where is that ROI? A lot of it ends up being kind of I don't want to say the boring stuff, but seeing the fun headsets, right? That's all fun. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that any investments into this kind of technology is going to have a strong return. So that's where a lot of our work has been. But we've done some work for architectural clients in virtual reality, because the key with VR is that you have scale, spatialization, you have proximity. You can actually look at things and understand exactly what they could look like, right? So if you think about how that applies in architecture, it used to be that you'd have to show a client a 2D rendering of a 3D rendering of a proposed future 3D space. And so what that means is you have to say, hey, so imagine what this bar like the height of the bar, the width of the walls, the height of the ceiling. Now you can actually just put someone in that space. They don't even have to be there, right? They don't have to. You don't have to break ground on construction. You can actually just go there. And then you can say in real time to the architect, actually, you know what, we need to lower the ceiling. The architect can lower the ceiling. Let's see what this looks like with this thing instead of this thing. They can change it out. You can see what pricing looks like, right? So that's an example, and bringing almost what we consider augmented technology into the virtual technology. We've also done some work where we've got a client coming up, and I can't really speak about the specifics, but it allows for kind of a real-time feedback on performance from a physical standpoint. And so using that technology to kind of assess how that is going on, and then being able to take that and use that data as a person to reflect on that and work on that. In addition to that, we've got several other prototypes that we're working on related to a variety of industries. So it's kind of an exciting space to be in right now, because every day something new comes out, and so it's kind of like new things that it's frustrating, right? Because we have to figure out, is this going to be what works? Is it not going to be what works? But again, that's where that strategic component comes in, as we can help advise our clients and are advising our clients on what the path is there.
Yeah, we are not working with anyone right now on the blockchain. Blockchain is a very, very new and kind of nascent space. Too nascent even for maybe some venture capital firms that I've been talking to. So it's quite interesting, and definitely an evolving field. But I would encourage people to learn as much as you can about it, because it'll be big here coming up.
Any other questions before we wrap up, Chris?
Yeah, so object-oriented data. What do you mean by that? Right. So no, blockchain. Yeah. So the question was, is blockchain a kind of an object-oriented kind of data source, and where you can kind of subscribe to it with APIs. And I think while that is an application, right, or a feature of it, the true kind of nature of the blockchain is that you have this ledger that is distributed across many different systems, kind of globally, and that this ledger tracks the current state of all kind of value in the system, right? And so the as goods are exchanged hands, or as any sort of value contracts, whatever kind of exchanges hands, that the state of that current network keeps getting updated, right? In what are known as like blocks, right? So every specific amount of time, you have a new block that comes into existence, right? With Bitcoin, that's like more Bitcoin is released into the system, the mining process. But with just blockchains, or with just the fundamental kind of technology, you have this, state transition that's happening kind of block by block, right? And then, yes, you can put data on the blockchain, and yes, you can kind of subscribe to it, but it's really more about the exchange of value, right? Whatever that value might be. Right. Blockchain. So the question was, financial kind of applications for blockchain are here, and what is kind of be, going to be the next step, the next kind of consumer-driven, right, one. It's really hard to say, but I really do think that there are a lot of great minds working on how to get machines to interact with each other, right? So I think the way that human beings are going to start kind of interacting with new blockchain applications is going to be, you have an autonomous car, right? And you want to rent that car to take you X somewhere, right? But that car doesn't really need to be managed by some central authority, right? It can just have an IoT device embedded within it, which can communicate globally with this blockchain, right? Connect to some 3G network or 4G network and understand that, you know, through maybe RFID technology with your phone, that you have the rights to that car, right? You have the rights to this contract that is sitting on the blockchain, right? And it's displayed through this secret key, right, that you have on your phone that you've paid for and then gotten the secret key. And so you can kind of start interacting with these machines without this kind of central party there, right? Same sort of concept for Airbnb, right? But no Airbnb central authority saying, hey, you know, you can rent this thing through our kind of our database, right? But it's just you put this kind of lock on your door, right? A smart lock, right? And you're able to kind of interact with that technology. So it really is bringing the future into humans interacting with technology and machines directly without some sort of central party kind of managing all that equipment.
And I can actually add to that. I am not an expert on blockchain by any means, but interesting application that I saw recently in virtual reality. Someone actually created an ecosystem built on blockchain. And so that blockchain technology creates a value to the land within this virtual world that people can then purchase said land and do whatever they want with it. If you want to build a school and educate people virtually, you can do that. You can build an amusement park that people can come to and interact in a virtual way. You can charge people. All in this currency that is stipulated and built on blockchain, the value of which, of course, is decentralized and built from that. So to kind of get at your question, Stephen, about the consumer-facing things, this was something I saw where I'm thinking to myself, well, what does this then mean for just our entire concept of value, of worth, of property, of, I mean, it's got some interesting quandaries, certainly, but also potential. I think there's some neat stuff there. So just felt like it worth adding.
Yeah, just to add to it quickly, I think one of the cool things, again, also not a blockchain expert, that is that you're, you know, if you're giving someone $1, you're writing a check, or you're transferring money to someone, there's so much context and information that's not there about that transaction. So we're talking about being able to embed this information very closely with the contract and have a record of that. So I think that's a really cool aspect of it, which opens up tons of applications for AR, machine learning, etc.
No to it.
So I mean, I think what you guys just said is the next industry that's really going to get impacted by the blockchain and machine learning is really the decentralization of goods and or manufacturing of those goods. And that's really interesting because the concept of ownership, as you just mentioned, is about to just disappear, which is fascinating. But we ran out of time, so I'll leave you with that, right? One of the things that we're going to be talking about is the manufacturing of goods here in about 6 weeks, right, Olio? And with the blockchain really coming up strong, I think that will probably be one of the topics that we continue to talk about, and I strongly encourage you guys to join next time. The one thing I wanted to leave everybody with here is really these 4 technologies alone are pretty interesting, but together are extremely powerful. And I think one of the things that I heard all of you guys say is that people are really going to be not necessarily losing their jobs, but being replaced by machines. And what I heard you say, Paul, was something very, very interesting, right? Supply chain operators or people in the supply chain are going to be encouraged to not only nurture, but maintain that relationship, not only with data, but with those machines. And I think that's the next evolution of technology. How are people really going to nurture data and maintain a relationship, not just with people, but with the machines that they're running? And that's what I think is really what we're talking about here, right? That evolution of technology in the supply chain is how do people come to an understanding of a relationship with a machine and with data? I mean, it's something that really hasn't crossed our minds until lately. And that's really fascinating. So with that, I wanted to thank everybody here today, everybody on YouTube. I wanted to give a special thanks to Olya who put all this together. If you guys have any questions, please email Olya at shockoe.com. She'll make sure to communicate or connect you guys with any one of these speakers. I'd give everybody's information away here, but I'm sure it's much easier. So again, it's OLYA at shockoe.com. And any final comments from you guys? Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. Thanks everybody for attending, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.